John Summers is the motoring historian. He was a company car thrashing technology sales rep that turned into a fairly inept sports bike rider. Hailing from California, he collects cars and bikes built with plenty of cheap and fast, and not much reliable. On his show, he gets together with various co-hosts to talk about new and old cars, driving, motorbikes, motor racing, and motoring travel.
Good day, good morning, good afternoon. It is John Summers, the motoring historian, with Mark Gammie.
Good evening.
Tonight, Michael Schumacher. The greatness of Michael Schumacher, Mark. How are we qualified to talk about the greatness of Michael Schumacher? Because we watched most of his races on the couch together. We may have even dozed off. There may have been alcohol involved. Who knows? There may have even been other intoxicants involved at different times in Michael Schumacher's career. But we watched Michael Schumacher's career, did we not? We watched the qualifying. We begrudgingly acknowledged that, as Martin Brundle said, Michael is worth half a second a lap.
Well, yeah, we watched all of it pretty much, didn't we?
So what's your earliest memory of Michael?
Well, the earliest memory for Michael is when he got that substitute drive at Jordan in Spa.
The green 7-Up car.
Yeah, when he first came across.
What do you remember about that drive? Because that's my earliest.
I don't remember anything about the drive, if I'm honest. I remember him qualifying it in 7th or whatever it was and thinking...
That's it. He qualified, I don't know whether it's 6th or 7th. The Google sphere will deal with that. He qualified blindingly well and then blew the clutch up on the line and had I can't even remember if he did the race or if he retired right there on the line. The point was...
He was faster than De Cesaris as a substitute. It's not surprising looking back now, but at the time people were like, oh, you know.
Oh, where he qualified on the grid was completely out of place. I was blown away by how fast he was. I was saying my earliest memory of him is reading about him when he was part of the Mercedes sports car team, like Group C team, when he was driving for Sauber. I don't know if they were Sauber then or if they were Mercedes, but you remember there was Schumi, Heinz-Harald Frentzen, who made it all the way to Formula One and who people don't talk about now, but actually had a reasonable Formula One career, won races for Williams, was in contention for a championship, was reasonable at Jordan, wasn't he? Old H.H. Frentzen, and the other one.
Quite a nice bloke as well, by all accounts.
Yeah. Well, Michael stole his girlfriend, didn't he? That his wife was dating Frentzen before she was with Michael. Karina, is it? I don't even know her name.
No idea.
And the other one was Wendlinger, Carl Wendlinger. You remember what happened to him? End of the tunnel, out of the tunnel at Monaco, into the end of the barrier. Weekend after Senna. It was the race meeting after Senna. And Wendlinger hit the end of the, that where Brundle had that terrible accident there. Not Brundle, Button. It's where, if you've seen the movie Grand Prix, it's where the accident is there, like the chicane, and Bandini had his moment there as well, didn't he? That was the moment, that was where Wendlinger went. Yeah, so from my earliest memory of Michael, and when Michael separated himself from those other three, was in that 7-Up Jordan at Spa, and, what a place to do it.
Yeah, I mean, he was just dynamic straight arriving, wasn't he? Obviously, people remember him for the time at Ferrari, where most of the championships came. But obviously, 2 of the championships didn't come from there. They came from the Benetton time, which, again, if you like, classic Formula One for me, in that it's the era of full-on cheating. It's the era of sort of, people tracking down radios that were set to transmit on their frequency, taped up in the canteen so that they can't get a radio broadcast to their cars during the race, all sorts of stuff like that. Obviously, your main man at Benetton, who had, should we say, his card marked on several occasions for some creative interpretations of rules.
So let's just touch on that, right? Because this modern Formula One movie, the team manager in it, his name is Ruben, but he is basically Flavio Briatore. With the exception of the Lewis Hamilton character's manager, he's the best character in the movie. Well, I know the villain is really good as well, but I feel like it's easy for the villain to be good in that movie. No, the Ruben character is Flavio Briatore. It's this flamboyant, really well-dressed, Mediterranean, handsome kind of team manager. Yeah, and he was, looking back, his ruthlessness matched Michael's ruthlessness, didn't it?
They were a devastating partnership.
And the cheating, right? And the cheating now, guys, listeners, is well worth looking back on, because it's like cheating, but with like 32-bit Windows 95 kind of computers. It's really, really, really like they cheated with traction control, and you could hear it. You could hear it go away from the line, but away from corners, but people still didn't quite cop onto it. But we'll move on to that, because what I want to touch on, Mark, is do you have any recollections of that brief period where we did actually have Senna versus Schumacher? Do you have any memories of that period at all?
Not massively. I mean, because Senna, for me, I respected Senna. I mean, how could you not? But for me, his whole sort of, touched by godness, sort of slightly sort of religiosity in his fluff, shall we say, didn't quite sit with me. Having arrived sort of after at F1, sort of after the season where it ended with him just smashing Prost off at the first corner, me thinking, that's kind of cheaty.
It's not really very sporting, is it?
No, well, I mean, no, but like,
justified or not for the Senna-rati out there, justified or not. And I loved Senna, but yeah, he was out of order. And this is important because Senna's out of orderness opened the door to Michael's out of orderness, in my humble opinion.
Yeah, completely. And opened the door to the current Red Bull out of orderness, if you will. And the recent history, the last 10 plus years, certainly, of Red Bull's creative bullshit, if you ask me. Again, not as someone who follows it too closely these days, but the same ruthless driver, the same ruthless team, the same disregard of actual facts for what they would prefer you to have seen. You can trace the line all the way back. But it doesn't have to be that way. And I think you can look at people like Damon Hill and Lewis Hamilton and a lot of drivers that don't do it that way.
That are gentlemen. Yes, I quite agree.
Yeah. You could absolutely also probably point, I bet you could do a spearman rank kind of distribution on that shit and show that you probably win, if I had to guess, about 20% more championships if you're an arsehole.
Yes. Yes, well, and definitely, they always said about Rubens Barrichello that he was never nasty enough to be a really winning racing driver. And I feel like there has to be part of you that is ready to do a really dirty move when it has to be done, which makes Damon Hill all the more awesome, by the way. I think in period, I didn't realize how awesome he was. And nowadays, people don't talk about him. Everyone's like, oh, Hakkinen versus Schumacher, because everyone just thinks that the Williams was the best car. But no, right? No. For some of that period, certainly with the Arrows, I feel like Hill was really worthwhile.
You don't get championships for free. The championships, even back then, and obviously they're so bloated now with 20-something races. But even then, there were more races than there were back in the 70s and, certainly in the 60s. But, you have to be consistently good, even in the best car. And I think he did have the best car. You don't win championships without being bloody good.
So my recollection of the combat versus Senna is that they had a little bit of contact, but there was never any wheel to wheel great battling or anything like that. And I have a piece, I'll put a link into it, but fundamentally, it is clear that Benetton were cheating for those early races of the 1994 season. They were cheating in two ways with the traction control. And this was, my understanding is a software program that when you turn the motor off, the chip forgets the program. That's part one. And part two was do you remember it was the beginning of refueling? And the refueling rigs, they were standard issue from the FIA, and they delivered fuel at 10 litres a second. I can't remember the statistics either way. They were had a double seal on them. And obviously you weren't meant to tamper with them. Well, my understanding is that Benetton tampered with them, and so they flowed faster. And that would explain why in a couple of races, but I think definitely the AIDA, the Pacific Grand Prix round, that's why Schumacher was able to leap Senna in the pits. Flav's cheating delivered, and Michael's skill, in fairness, put Senna in that position at Imola where he really felt like he had to win. He really felt like he absolutely had to win that weekend in Imola. And Michael features in the Senna mini-series, but not really. He's just like in the background. The sense of the pressure building up comes like not from Michael. It came from Michael in period, in my humble opinion. Now, I'm going to say, we talked about Hill there. I don't have a lot of recollections of Michael's early championships, those ones for Benetton. And that's because when Senna died, I just sort of stopped watching. And I would say you will remember the moment where I sort of reconnected with it. It was when we were in the States, when we were here for the first time, and when we arranged to meet in Chicago bus station, didn't we? And for a hot minute there, it looked like I maybe wasn't going to show up and you were maybe going to be stranded in the middle of America with no money. You had like $80 or something, didn't you? And were down to your last $10 and had just bought a burger.
I had $6 left when I arrived at Chicago bus station. I think you were 2 hours, 40 minutes late. But I had confidence you'd turn up eventually. I was. I did turn up eventually. And in fact, whilst, I don't know where we'd meet, but either way, I remember whilst walking a lap of the bus station, waiting for you, I saw a piece of paper, like newspaper, blowing down the street. And it talked about Schumacher being champion, like for the first time or the second time, I can't even remember which it was, but it talked about him being champion. And I was like, oh, wow. Because I did actually watch that race in Adelaide, the one where he got under Hill in an example of his dirty driving. But we're going to talk about the greatness of Schumi, and then we're going to talk about the dirty driving stuff at the end. Cool.
I feel like my first recollection of watching him race with you and us grudgingly admitting that although he was a little bit robotic and he didn't have the passion that we'd seen from like a Senna or a Mansell, was that time with Ferrari, because he won those couple of championships for Benetton. And then he was like, you know what, I am going to, as Luca de Montezemolo says, when I joined Ferrari, she was like a great actress who was getting no scripts. This is when I saw him speak at the Stanford Business School, bloody 20 years ago now. But he was like, I wanted to like bring her back, Well, that's what Michael wanted to do. That's what Alonso wanted to do. That's what Vettel wanted to do. That's what Hamilton wanted. Well, Michael managed it, didn't he?
Yeah.
Year in 97, I remember it was a bit like watching Senna in the early years, where if the circuit was an asshole circuit, or if it rained, or if they'd never been there, but if there's some wild factor that meant it was pure driving skill, Michael would probably win. But the rest of the time, he was like qualifying in the top 5 there or thereabouts. But do you have memories of that period?
Yeah, because when he arrived, the car wasn't good enough, was it? I mean, the car was pretty poor that first year. As you say, if it rained or there was something going on, he would stand out to you and you'd be like, okay. So, I mean, I've got a few like just jotted down. I did a quick deco through the career as to races that stood out for me. Obviously, the first one, Spain 94, stuck in 5th gear for most of the race and finishes 2nd. Not any other gears, 5th gear the whole way around the circuit. And he's 2nd. I think he lost less than a second a lap. Pretty decent. That was an impressive thing.
And similar to that incredible drive of Senna's at Rio, where the car's like stuck in gear.
Exactly. 95, the European Grand Prix. That's the 3-stopper, if I reckon. Oh, no. That is one of the 3 stoppers. So that's not the 3-stopper. So 3 stops, European GP. He takes 25 seconds out of a Lacey in 15 laps and then passes him around the outside of the chicane. Okay, I mean, that's grabbing my attention. I mean, because of course that's one of those really exciting periods where they're like checking the seconds all the time. No, that's another half second, Oh, that's 0.9 of a second. You're thinking, Jesus.
What track was that at?
It's the European Grand Prix, like in 95. Let me just have a quick look.
It probably would have been Nürburgring, wouldn't it? The Südschleife.
It was, Nürburgring.
We've flipped back to his Benetton years there, haven't we? What you've correctly highlighted there is just how dominant he was at Benetton, that really he had done it all by the end of his 2 years there. So he was like, oh, I'll go to Ferrari, even though he was only like 25 or something at the time when he went there.
And I'm a Ferrari fan. Through those years, I'd been supporting a Lacey, looking out to see where Berger was coming in the 27 and the 28 cars, And I like the guys. Yeah, a Lacey was cool, and he's cool. Yeah, you see him interviewed. A Lacey is a cool guy. I mean, he's about 2'3", but he's a cool guy. And he was quick. You'd look for what he would do, the little laciness. Would there be a burst? Would there be a stint on a set of tyres that he really liked in the race or something? And, he'd put in a spurt and he'd do a good race. But Michael delivered that every weekend, not just a little bit here and there sometimes. If you watch the whole race, qualifying and the race, there would be something where you were like, diggity, that was something. There would always be something.
To me, it's like the difference between an Alpha and a BMW, that you wanted to like the Alpha more, and sure, there were some things about it that were better, but you just knew that on the rainy morning on the Autobahn where you just is thrashing with rain, and is that a deer that I need to brake and steer? You just want the BMW in those moments. And Michael had that kind of just This is what built the team. Right. And this is what I've got next to Ferrari is I've got Ross Brawn and Rory Byrne written down. But the point is that if you're part of that team, if you lean in to Michael, what you get, he always delivers. Get it back. His speed built the team. His speed, his roboticness built team.
For sure, dude. I mean, so the other races I've got in that period, so Spain 96, his Reagan-Meister sort of first getting on the galoshes. I think that was the first Ferrari win. He wins he's like 45 seconds ahead, not a bit ahead, miles.
So which race was that?
Spain 96.
Sure, was it at Barcelona then?
So. I think it was Barcelona. Hungary 98, that was the one where it was to beat Hakkinen, they needed to 3-stop. And it wasn't just a 3-stop. Ross Brawn's like, Michael, we're going to give you new sets of tyres. We'll get you in when we can in clear air. It needs qualifying laps. All qualifying laps. And he was just mucking metronomic, just like within a tenth or two of qualifying pace all the fucking time.
Let's stop and think about that, because I was saying this to Wally the other day, that this whole way that modern Formula One is, where, it stints and you have to that whole way of racing was invented by Michael and Ross Brawn. That Ross Brawn visualized the strategy based upon Michael's speed. And as you just said, Michael just delivered with the speed. It was really, and this was the thing with it, that as an Englishman and as somebody who loved the sport, you instinctively wanted to support Damon Hill in those years. And by the time he'd left Benetton and was at Ferrari, you instinctively didn't want to support him because you knew how dirty he was. And he didn't have the sort of, but it's from my heart kind of passion that I saw in Senna. And he didn't have that. For me, he was just did whatever was best for the team.
The way I see Michael, and again, I don't know him, I just watched him a lot, and I watched the interviews, and as I say, sort of spent the whole time immersed in F1 at the time. There was no quarter. It was all, if I'm in for this, I'm all in for this. 11 tenths, I'm like, I will pull any rug from anyone. I will do anything to get the fastest car. I will, don't get me wrong, on the track, I will be peerless. I will be the fastest thing out there, and don't worry about it. If it rains, I'll be faster than everyone else even more then. If there's an alternate thing, something chucked into the mix that'll, shake it all up, I'll max that as well.
Tom Brady and the cheatiness with the ball. It so reminded me of Michael. It was like, really? You really had to do that? You really had to. I just want to highlight, we're going to talk about this a little bit afterwards, but the thing that really stood out for me with Michael was, do you remember when right at the end of Michael's time where Alonso was coming on really strong and they changed the rules basically just to defeat Michael? And it was Monaco qualifying. I'm going to say this. You knew I was going to say this. Was qualifying at Monaco, where everyone knows qualifying is the most important thing. And there was a format at the time where you had to go out and do a fast lap, and there was only a tiny window. And Alonso had been fastest all weekend and was going to go out and do a fast lap. And what does Michael do? Parks it against the barrier at
he outbraked himself, crashed.
So cynical and so obvious, and coming on the back of the other things that he'd done in his career, it was just
it embarrassed you. As a Ferrari fan, I wanted the guy to win. You're like Ferrari fan. You've suffered through all the years of them being rubbish, and now your team's good and it's winning all the time. And you're like, this is fine. I'm happy to see pole and then the win each race. People are getting a bit bored of it after 4.5, 5 years. I understand. I was bored of losing. So it's the way these things come and go. But yeah, it was just one of those ones. You're like, oh, for fuck's sake. You try and hide in your face as a fan, being like, oh, really, we had to do this. In the interview after, before they demoted him, they had the post-qualifying interview. He looked like the cat that's sitting there and caught in the cream all over his face, going like, me? Like, what? As if to say...
Yeah, because he planned it.
Of course he had. I mean, it was absolutely a blatant cheat. Alonso's out behind him 3 seconds faster through the
But it wasn't like he went out and, the idea came to him, oh, I could just do this. And it wasn't like spontaneous.
Oh, I don't know. I'm not sure about that. I think he would have gone out expecting to be faster or hoping to be. But if he wasn't, about halfway round, he's thinking, how do I park this in the barrier? Because that way I think he's quick enough to process that in the lap.
And that's a good point. That was the other thing about him, wasn't he? That he was very quick at processing stuff in the race. And again, now we expect people to be able to do that. But he was the first driver who actually did that. Remember, they called Prost Le Professeur because he could actually work out his fuel stint without the team needing to radio it to him. I mean, now, if Prost was Le Professeur, Alonso is, Stephen Bloody Hawking in comparison, right? And I dare say Verstappen is that more so. This is what I was going to say. We were talking about the cheaty fuel rigs. You remember what happened with those cheaty fuel rigs? Schumacher's teammate's car caught fire. Do you remember who that was driving that car? Jos Verstappen.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
My only memories of Jos Verstappen prior to the sun were that pit lane fire, which proved the cheaty fuel rig.
Yeah.
And he had a huge crash at the beginning of Rio. And I thought, you're a fucking idiot. And now more recently, I'm like, you're a fucking idiot. I didn't like Christian Horner, but I really feel sufficiently passionately about. I actually have time for Max. I actually have time because I feel like
talent. You can't deny the talent. It's like he's very like Michael. He will do anything to win.
Very like Michael.
He's very like exceptionally fast in all circumstances. Like he's just ruthless.
And Jos is steamrolling it for him. I'm doing gas karting with my boy. If you look on the website, it says the boy has to be 13. My boy's 11 and he's doing it. Now, why is that? Well, the bloke that runs it is English. We've gone out, we've done the tests. It's clear that my boy knows how to drive around the track, not getting in the adults' way. When the adults come up and pass him, he moves off the racing line and waves them through, and they give him a nice wave and go on by. He's a pleasure to be out on the track with. So why wouldn't the bloke running the series take my money? My kid knows how to do it. What that means is that by the time he's 15 and in the middle of the series, he's going to have 4 years experience. That's how so when you think about, we're talking about the greatness of Michael Schumacher, and it's really awesome that you said that Max reminds you, because Max does remind, and I think it's thanks to Jos. I think Jos, this line that we just talked from Senna through Michael to Red Bull now.
Yeah, if I do it, it's not cheating. That's the MO. That's pretty much how it is. I've got to say, look, shout out Lando Norris. Congratulations. I think he's a genuinely nice bloke and he's won the championship, and that's awesome.
I was kind of more of a pastry man myself, but I haven't watched a lot of races.
Hey, look, whatever. I wouldn't have minded if pastry had won either. It's to the spoils, etc. I don't have a horse in this race, but congrats. He seemed like a nice chap, and it's nice to see that sort of rewarded. So
let's break down Michael's time at Ferrari, right? Because he went there in 97 and the car was crap. The car was good by like 98 or 99, thanks to this dream team and this flywheel effect of Michael, Ross Brawn, and Rory Byrne doing the engine. So that's two Englishmen.
Yep.
Like as English as you or I, two Englishmen and a German making Ferrari great again.
I think Enzo would have approved, wouldn't he? I mean, he didn't really give that much of a shit about that either, did he?
Well, he always preferred not having the Italians because before the war, with the fascists, if your drivers died, they were like compared to saints and it was fine. Paul Baxter. Google up this guy. He's written some really interesting stuff about fascism and speed and sacrifice and the whole stuff. It's really, really awesome. After the war, it was no longer cool for people to be killed in motorsport. So Ferrari was like, I didn't really want Italian drivers. He liked foreigners because the Italian press got less upset if it wasn't, the son of Lodi being killed. If it was like I Biondi Inglesi, it didn't really matter so much. Yeah. That would, of course, be Mike Hawthorne. '02 and '04, those were the years that Michael was completely dominant and made the racing completely boring. I can't remember what happened in '03. This is post Hakkinen. So you have that era where Hakkinen sort of took him on a little bit. There was an era for a hot minute there, Montoya was sort of in the picture as well. But there was very definitely a stat ranking of 1, 2, 3 between them. And with hindsight, the racing was not as close as it had been in the years of the big four of like Senna, Piquet, Prost, Mansell. They were closely matched with different skills. It didn't seem that way to me in the Michael era. Now, I should say, Michael dominance at Ferrari. Nowadays, this is typical, right? Since then, we've had Vettel's dominance. We've got Verstappen's now. We had Lewis Hamilton's for a little bit. It has become typical. And I think it's interesting because contemporary with Michael, there was Jimmy Johnson in NASCAR, arguably Rossi in bikes, but I think less so. But even more than Schumi, Sebastian Loeb in rallying. So I feel like something happened with technology. There was a critical mass with automotive technology that meant that even though the cars at the back of the field were like closer, so in theory, it was more competitive because the cars at the back were closer. In actual fact, you know, the gap between Manchester United and Charlton Athletic became a whole lot wider. So comes somebody like Loeb or Jimmy Johnson with Johnson, was it Chad Knaus? Is that the, gosh, NASCAR guys will hate me, but I think that was the name of his, like Ross Brawn, that created the same kind of flywheel effect, you know, because they were the best team or the best mechanics wanted to join because they had the best mechanics. Their pit stops were faster because their pit stops were faster. Jimmy Johnson didn't need to overdrive the car. So at the end of the race, his car wasn't smashed up so he could drive through and win kind of thing. You know, there was that same kind of, and I feel like there was something in motorsport at that period at the turn of the century, which we still have now, that means that the technology just meant that a small technological gain, you could flywheel out into a really big thing. And I feel like Michael and Michael's dominance at Ferrari is symbolic of that.
Yeah, and I've just thought, actually, it also sort of coincides with really extreme downforce, doesn't it? And this dirtying up of the air and the cars behind, and therefore running close to people and being able to pass become more difficult. So I guess that would feed into the same thing, because if you've got track position, you know, it's hard to overtake. So those sort of things have been a thing for quite some time, but they've got even worse lately. It's still a modern problem in F1, not being able to follow things. Not exclusive to F1. MotoGP has that now since the sort of extreme aero. You have that phantom stuff where you're hard on the brakes at the end of the, Mugello straight at 225 miles an hour. You get into the slipstream of the bike in front and your bike accelerates. You're on full brake, the front's bottomed out, and then it starts accelerating again as you're heading towards the gravel trap. So this not being able to follow things due to aero is not just F1.
I mean, it was 75 years of Formula One at Pebble this year, right? So you have a row of like Formula One cars, and as you walk along them with your 11-year-old son, he looks at the McLaren 4.4, the 1988 Senna car. It was actually Prost's car, because that's a better example. Prost had a very original, like undamaged car that he raced most of the season. So that was the car that McLaren had at Pebble, I think quite rightly. Very aerodynamically clean in comparison to even the cars of like the turn of the century, the Schumacher Ferraris. And those cars are so much more aerodynamically simple than the V10 stuff of the Vettel kind of era. Yeah, so I think you're right. I think the big downforce is part of that, and just aero generally being more of a thing.
I mean, just a couple of other races, just to mention, I guess. Malaysia 99, I remember that was the year, didn't he break his leg at Copse?
At Stowe, Silverstone.
Stowe.
So I don't know what happened for him to slide on into the barriers, but yes, young'uns, at Silverstone, it was like, I mean, it's 200 miles an hour hanger, isn't it? You brake and turn in. I don't know what speed they would go around it then, but probably certainly more than 100 miles an hour, probably more than 150 miles an hour. He speared straight off into the barriers, broke his leg, didn't he? It looked like he would be out for a while. And
well, I mean, he was, but I mean, a couple of months, I guess. I mean, what was he? He was back in Malaysia, which was back end of the season. Malaysia round every year, wasn't it? But the buzz about it at the time was, of course, is he going to have lost any speed? First major accident. Plenty of people have had big ones, and the same, are not. I haven't, just lose a couple of tenths. Nothing still epically fast, still faster than you and I will ever dream to be, but they're not quite maxing it. Net, that was total bullshit. He came back and outqualified everybody, including his teammate, by over a second. Like everyone. I mean, 1 second doesn't happen nowadays and didn't happen then. So, put that to bed pretty quickly. And he spent the rest of that year doing everything he could to lose races to Eddie Irvine to try and ensure Eddie Irvine won the championship unsuccessfully, as I recollect, because Eddie Irvine's never been World Championship. But I remember I think Martin Brundle saying after one of the races, well, Michael's done everything he can to lose this race and still won it because he couldn't drive slow enough to hand it to Eddie Irvine because of the traffic Irvine was stuck in. That was how the rest of that year worked out. Is it 2000 to 2005, the years of the sort of back-to-back championships? It was metronomic.
The two I've highlighted are 2002 and 2004, because I think in those ones there was virtually no competition. And I think after that, and certainly that was the era where by that time, I don't think you and I were watching together quite as much, but the people I was watching with definitely lost interest at this Michael processional kind of thing, which interestingly has become a feature since then that, even more than it used to be. You used to be able to take a guess that it would be 1 of 2 or 3 drivers, whereas now I feel like the sport's evolved to a stage where you're like hoping it isn't going to be a particular individual unless you're a supporter of that individual. It's a really strange...
Absolutely. I mean, it was just every weekend dominance. But yeah, you're right. They did. I can't remember what the rules changes were, but they changed them up to be more.
Yeah, it was to do with, because that was do you remember that was the
development time and all that sort of wind tunnel time and all that sort of stuff they started to limit.
Well, no, I think that was in 2008 that they did that. What I remember them doing with Michael was, do you remember that was when Michelin were coming into the sport? Mm-hmm. And Bridgestone were only supplying a small number of teams. And then it reached a point where they were only supplying like Ferrari and 2 of the back market teams. They were basically just developing tyres for Michael. And it was the time where you could have compounds on the fly. So Michael could like go out, do the warm up, go out, do Friday quali or do Friday practice or whatever, warm up. And then for quali on Saturday, could have like a bespoke set of tyres made up for those weather conditions and that. So it was that kind of thing, I think, that they...
And just for anybody that gets upset about like us casting aspersions at anyone for cheating, that's why I started off by saying cheating as the golden era of cheating. And it carries on. It wasn't that long ago where, you remember they used to have that sort of automatic delay after the start, before the red lights go out and they can all go. And it would be a varying amount of time between like 1 and 4 seconds of delay between it, the lights all being on and them going off.
Yeah.
I read an article the other day, I can't remember which year it was. Teams had got wind of something in the signal that they wouldn't change the delay from the practice start to the main start, and teams worked out how to hack it. So they were just programming in like a 0.1 second reaction time for their drivers and then just sending them to go immediately when they knew it was going to go off. And the reason the FIA caught them, they left it on one weekend and didn't send the setting. They delayed the start about another 2 seconds, and like 9 drivers jumped the start. It's like, mwah. Well, we don't have to look too hard to see who the cheats are, do we? So, this is not a sort of, they would just took it to another level. And I would go so far as to say that those sort of things are, again, it's a ruthless billion-dollar sport where the money from the advertising, the power, the intoxication, the flamboyance, the supermodels, the casinos, the absolute up its own arseness of it must be incredibly intoxicating. What a massive high. You are going to be absolutely full of yourself. You are King Dingaling if you're, in that position. So it's not surprising that people will do anything to win. No one gives a shit who came second. And when that much money is being spent, they limited the spend to something like, was it 250 million or something? Which still doesn't sound like a lot, but there's one to run 2 cars for like 25 races. That's a shit ton of money. And that's limited, and that doesn't include quite a lot of sunk costs that they can add to it. So there's a lot at stake.
So they changed the rules to defeat him. And in 2005, Alonso has the first of his championships, and then I think another in 2006. So I want to kind of draw a line under that early period of Michael's career. And I want to highlight, I think, key strengths that people should take away, right? The first is that sheer speed, Brundle and the half a second a lap. And the fact that that worked all sorts of different ways, because it was like 3 horsepower. You could like add downforce, you could do a different pit strategy. It just opened so many doors. The strategy, which is sort of bolted onto that has become a feature of the sport now, is that you use pit stop strategy to give you an advantage, or you hold a teammate back by pitting late or something like that. For all the speed, Michael wasn't like Vettel was, where he had the speed, but if if a sheep farted that morning, or if he didn't have his breakfast just the way he liked it, he couldn't do. Michael wasn't like that. Michael could tiger. Not always, but Michael could tiger from the back when he needed to. And he was great when conditions were uncertain. He was awesome, not just in the rain. The other thing he was really good at was he learned the circuit really, really fast. And another Brundle story that I always remember about him was talking about how Brundle had been at Barcelona or Silverstone, but either way, he'd been there for like a day and a half with the team testing. Michael flies in, because Brundle and Michael were teammates at Benetton, weren't they? I think in 1960. Anyway, Michael flies in, and his second lap out is faster than anything Martin has done so far this weekend. And you're just like, oh, because the psychological effect of that was huge, right?
It could not be.
The focus on me, we've just talked about. So speed, strategy, racecraft, the focus on me, this is what made him stand out. But also, I've got him here as the classic German baddie. That was the heading that I gave. And you know that movie that we've enjoyed the novel as well, The Prisoner of Zenda. James Mason, who's as English or as American as they come, is the German villain. And do you remember right at the end, he acts like a gentleman, but then right at the end, he turns into a dirty bastard right at the end, just like Michael would. Like right at the end, he would like turn. Like I feel like he had those kind of quality about him. We've talked about those kind of things a lot. Let's reflect on that. How much does that compromise his legacy, Mark? The fact that he was a bit dirty, especially in comparison to a gentleman like Hill.
I mean, it's complicated, isn't it? Yeah, because, I mean, the elephant in the room is that the guy's a vegetable now.
Well, let's talk about that phase now, because the reason I wanted to draw this line in the sand is the guy who raced for Mercedes, seems to me, was not remotely the same person who raced for Benetton or Ferrari. Not remotely.
He still had flashes here and there, and it was a shame. I think some of the way it turned out that he nearly won a race at the end for Mercedes, and by rights he should have done a bit of a bad turn for him. I think, was it Canada? I can't remember exactly where. And he did have that qualifying at Monaco in the Mercedes where he put it on pole. I think he had a 5-second something else, a grid place drop for a clutch or a gearbox or something like that change. Although he got it, it was immediately demoted. But still, a nice sort of swan song for him. But I meant sort of just, I didn't mean to, vegetables a bit unkind. Obviously he is an individual, he's alive. He's well with us, but he can't speak for himself because of the awful accident with the skiing, which as I understand, I don't know if this is true, he was wearing a GoPro on his helmet and was doing like black runs on a snowboard or something. Like fell off, hit a tree, and the GoPro went through his helmet. That was my understanding. So may not be true, but he certainly had a very bad accident. He's around, but he can't speak for himself. And I think, you therefore want to be ultra careful as to what you say about somebody because, he's there to defend himself, but he's not really there to defend himself. Not that he's ever going to hear this, even if he were. Or give a shit.
You're saying that we need to be careful about what we say when I call him a classic German baddie and you call him a vegetable.
Well, yeah, and I want to be clear. Vegetable's totally unfair. I'm just a bit tired. I don't know if he's a paraplegic now, but he's clearly not the man he was.
Well, we don't know, do we?
No, we don't know. It's all like absolute lockdown. Money buys you privacy, doesn't it? That amount of money buys you radio silence.
The absurd thing is that he was lucky in period, right? When in the Ferrari years, how many times did Rubens Barrichello's car break down whilst Michael's didn't? At least half a dozen races over the years where you were just like, wow, he was lucky with that. There were a lot of things that he was lucky with. And then the Mercedes years, I felt like he was a shadow of who he was. He was a different person. And I've jotted down here in comparison with Niki Lauda's return. And I really feel like only Lauda has ever made coming out of retirement work. I can't think of somebody else who's come out of retirement And
Alonso's the only other one. Not that he's won that much. He came back and about 2/3 of the way through the first year when he came back, having done like WEC sports cars and stuff and won Le Mans on that, and failed to win the Indy 500, of course, but was shaping up. But, it's a bit of a lottery like all motorsport, and the car died. But he came back and was competitive. They asked him about 2/3 of the way through the first year, what's the problem, Fernando? He said, me, I'm too slow. And was by the next year, again, back to ruining other careers of younger people who come up thinking this old geezer can't drive anymore. Actually, he's super sharp. He's really fast. And oh, fuck, he's beaten me again. And it's 16-1 in qualifying. But if we go back onto Michael, there's a bunch of things to say about Michael. I mean, he's a really complicated story because the speed is undeniable. And even if you're an Uber fan, and I was never an Uber fan, I was just a Ferrari fan. And oh, wow, this guy's turned up and he's winning in your favorite car. Great. This is awesome. Unless you've got no empathy, people like Rubens Barrichello, they're driving the Ferrari as well, and he's a cool guy. And when he wins, it's really great, and you like the guy. And then Michael puts him in the wall, and you're like, "What? Why did you do that, Michael? You didn't need to do that. They would have team orders him behind you, dude. Like, you didn't need to put him in the barrier or into the gravel trap." And he would just do that shit. That would just happen. It would be the ruthless move. So that happened all the way through his career. So by the end of it, you're like, I know there's been this amazing success, but you sort of feel like slightly soiled by the association. It just takes the luster off, And the Brady examples get interesting. And again, any Patriots fans will be hating you for the Inflategate references and stuff. But the fact is, like it or not, the Patriots lost draft picks twice for scandals, shall we just leave it at that. But again, it's the same sort of thing. It's, Bill Belichick was a master at rule book exploitation. Flavio Briatore, the same. If you want a sort of a more noble example, greatest designer of,
Adrian Newey.
Adrian Newey, yeah. Greatest designer in F1, full stop. He was the genius still at finding aerodynamic loopholes and how to get the best out of a blank piece of canvas with increasingly sort of reduced parameters. Michael would do that in every way. If he needed to block you in qualifying, no teammate, to get his lap in, he would do that shit, without thinking about it. And then barefaced lie about it afterwards, smiling quite charmingly. No.
People said he was arrogant, didn't they, at the time? And I always felt arrogance was only overestimation of who you were. Anything Michael said was probably true. It might come across as arrogant, but it was.
He was the best, and he thought he was the best, and he was the best for quite a long period. Yes. That's accurate. When Rossi went from was it Honda to Yamaha, and then won the first race on the Yamaha in South Africa and won the championship that year on the Yamaha on basically what hadn't been a competitor. He rightly thought he was the biggest dick on the paddock, and he fucking was. So yes. There have been other people since that have won more and longer, but whatever.
Yeah, and that was how I felt as a fan of Michael. Was that you were kind of in awe of him. You almost felt the same way about him as the stormtroopers feel about Darth Vader, in that, you didn't necessarily love him, but my word, you just respected the peerless capability. Yeah. Allied with the ruthlessness. It wasn't just that he was fast, it's that he would do whatever it took for his team to be placed well.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. He was just, it was maximum attack, to borrow from Marco Allen, all the time, in every respect. Full team bit, back at the factory, doing the laps, putting in the feedback, every sort of Germanic way to get as much as you could out of it. And Hakkinen did the same, I think, in his very Finnish sort of Sisu way of complete.
But like Nico Rosberg, Hakkinen was only able to summon up that level of intensity for a short period.
Yeah,
there were 2 or 3 years where Hakkinen matched Michael. For a lot of the time and for what it's worth, I should underline the last Grand Prix that I went to, I sat in the grandstand at Stowe Corner at Silverstone, and I watched Mika Hakkinen drive a better race than Michael Schumacher or Juan Pablo Montoya. I watched their lines around Stowe. I was positioned where I could see the curb. Hakkinen's lines were best. Michael's were next best. Nobody else was anywhere near except Montoya, who had a dirt tracky kind of style. The car always seemed a bit of Bo Dukage as it went around there. And I feel like that recollection is a fairly effective thumbnail of that particular era of Michael's career. We talked about the Mercedes years a little bit. You touched on the skiing accident at the end there. I want to touch on something which I think plugs together the skiing accident and the end of the racing career. Do you remember he did motorcycles for a little bit? He rode Triumph triples, like Triumph Daytona triples. And he got within, I remember you saying to me years ago that he had got within like a superbike kind of time. He'd have been like back of the grid at the superbike race kind of thing. And
I think if you talk to the bike riders, they were a bit like, meh, that's not that quick. You know, to a sort of enthusiast, neutral observer, you were like, wow, that's pretty quick. You know, I couldn't dream of ever being that fast. But of course, the other thing to remember about that is it screwed him up, didn't he? He had that accident and like smashed his neck up. And that was why the following year when he was back, he was weak. You know, he was physically unable to perform in the car, but, you know, was in the car anyway because he was Michael Schumacher. And it impinged on his ability to get back to the top, didn't it? You know, it meant he was outperformed by his teammate. Whether or not that was the whole reason, it certainly didn't help.
Martin Brundle had a very unsatisfactory Formula One career. No pole positions, no wins, no championships. And yet so much promise. So much promise. There was so much speed when he was young. You know, had there been no Senna, he'd have been dominant in Formula Ford, wouldn't he? Had there been no Senna, maybe it would have been him at Lotus. You know, you probably would have been Derek Warwick, wouldn't it? But you understand what I'm saying. That yet now he's the bloke that does the funny grid walk, isn't he? He's the old buffer that talks about the sport. Nobody associates Martin Brundle with fire-breathing 1,500 horsepower turbo Formula One cars or winning Le Mans in a 240 horsepower V12 Jaguar when the Mulsanne Straight had no chicanes in kind of thing. But that's who Brundle really is. So you've got this strange failure in Formula One, but a complete life. Whereas Michael, what a peculiar back to front.
For sure, yeah. It's a weird story, isn't it? Top of the world, all the money, you know, and like, to be fair to him, it wasn't, I'm not saying he was boring or monotonous. He was committed, married, loved his wife, committed to his wife. That was that. You know, there wasn't other stray thoughts. It seems to me from, you know, not knowing him particularly well, just observing his career from a distance, that was the way he approached everything. You know, once he decided on something, it was full on. You know, he was all in, you know, chips to the middle.
The sudden death has allowed Senna's not so savoury characteristics to be swept under the rug by popular memory. And Michael's afforded no such privilege. And if a picture, any picture, ever emerges of what he looks like now, Lord knows David Hasselhoff doesn't look as good as he did in his 20s. Like, our impression of Michael is that uber dominant 20-something, 30-something man, not a 50-something man, let alone a 50-something man who's battling the kind of challenges that he's battling.
It's weird because, I mean, you know, it does feel like a sort of, you know, a Disney story. It's like, you know, amazingly quick at the start, top of the world, slightly tails off, and then just gone. Not dead, sort of like away, you know, not talked about.
I should say about that, and perhaps we should finish on this note, that I remember when it happened discussing it with you, and we both agreed that if anybody had the willpower to battle back from whatever had happened, anybody that we could think of had the willpower to, Michael Schumacher was that individual. And I'm still, as we're talking here now, and as I think back about just the sheer focus and determination he brought to racing cars, I would be not completely surprised were he to make some kind, no, that's too much, isn't it? If it's been too long now, but you still feel like it's him. You feel like he still might manage it. You know, you talked about breaking the leg at Silverstone and being back in time for Malaysia. You know, it's that thing. You still feel like, my God, if anybody can overcome, if anybody can come back from the place that he's gone, that he is at the moment, if anybody can come back, it's Michael Schumacher.
And look, I mean, again, I want to, he's never going to hear this, but if he did, I would like to say cheers. You know, I really enjoyed watching him. The speed was unbelievable. Always. There was always something as a Michael, you know, as a Ferrari fan of that period where you were like, wow, look at that. Wow, look at that. Yeah. Every weekend, there'd be something on the Saturday or the Sunday to make you go, hot diggity. You know, that was quite the thing. For a long time, he was just absolutely peerless. And that's awesome. You know, I really enjoyed watching those races.
And that was poetry, wasn't it? It
Yeah.
really was poetry. And even those boring seasons where he was just so much better than everybody else, it was almost like going to a rock show where you know the songs they're going to play, but you still enjoy them. You know, it had that kind of a feel to it, didn't it?
Definitely.
Well, Mark, Godspeed, Michael, and thank you for your time.
Cheers. Take it easy. Cool.
Thank you, Drive Through.
This episode has been brought to you by Grand Touring Motorsports as part of our Motoring Podcast Network. For more episodes like this, tune in each week for more exciting and educational content from organizations like the Exotic Car Marketplace, the Motoring Historian, Break Fix, and many others. If you'd like to support Grand Touring Motorsports and the Motoring Podcast Network, sign up for one of our many sponsorship tiers at www.patreon.com/GT Motorsports. Please note that the content, opinions, and materials presented and expressed in this episode are those of its creator, and this episode has been published with their consent. If you have any inquiries about this program, please contact the creators of this episode via email or social media as mentioned in the episode.